there's only one voice in the room, it's I think it's hard unless you're an auteur, unless you're kind of completely consumed by your own vision and passion. Most of the time, it's not that. Most of the time, it's kind of hard work, and it's about thrashing something out of nothing, and just playing around, being experimental, and trying things out. Going, oh, that's terrible. Let's try the next thing. Oh, that's terrible. Let's try another thing. And I think that can be very productive. But it's going to be different for different people. I mean, of course, but it started as a hobby. So I mean, as I'm sure it does with most designers, you play games and then you think, well, I could do better than that. But I think it went even further back than that, because even as kids, we used to play games. We had games in the house, and me and my older sister, we used to change the rules. Like we thought that was fine, but we could totally make games ourselves, or take a game that we liked and change it. Take a boxed game and change the rules. Like that didn't seem transgressive. So I think that's the beginning of it for lots of designers. It's like, oh, I could do that. And I think that's probably the same for lots of people.
Yeah, and you could.
And you could. I mean, that's the wonder of it, isn't it? Any game it's all exposed engineering. So people can take the bits out of the box and do what the hell they like. They certainly don't have to do what the designer tells them. But I think a lot of people are very happy to do what the rules say. But there's a broad swath of people who are very happy to do house rules. I mean, making up house rules is the beginning of that, is the thin end of the wedge of becoming a designer. So we don't like that one bit, so we're going to change that. And that's just the beginning, isn't it? So after that, all bets are off.
Yeah, for sure. That's also, for me, one thing I think that helped me a lot with game design was we were very lazy when we played games, and we instead of looking up how it should be played, how it's meant to be played, if there's a rule that we didn't remember, we would just be like, okay, what sounds like it would be fair? This is before I designed games, and I feel like that's a good question to ask, and sometimes you get it right, or you get to the same place where the designer of the game got to. Not always.
Maybe, but that is design essentially.
Yeah,
that is the process, isn't it? It's like, what should it be like? That's exactly, when you play test with designers, that's exactly what they tell you. And everybody has a different opinion about what it should be like. That's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I suppose my answer to how did I get in was very gently over a long period of time. And then at some point I took it a little bit more seriously, and really my entry was I entered some design contests in Europe, or mainland Europe, I should say, and one of them led to my first game being published. Like, I won a contest in Spain, and that game was spotted essentially by part of a person from Asmodee, or Asmodee as it used to be, and that was what it got picked up and published. It was, a real feather in my cap at the time. It was a fantastic calling card as well when we started reaching out to other publishers. So I got really lucky, I think.
Yeah. How did you find out about the contest? And was it like were you physically in Spain, or was it an online thing?
I think some of them are still going. Like, the biggest one that is the one in Germany called the Hippodice, and I think that still runs. So there was a few years where I tried to enter multiple contests with games, because it was a good discipline to actually make a game and submit it and have to write the rules and make a prototype. And I enjoyed the creative, the crafting aspect of that as much as the design. I wasn't very good at playtesting, but this was just when I was beginning to meet other designers, and I submitted the game that became Divinare to the contest in Spain, but it was all done remotely. And I think most of the other entrants were Spanish. So I think when I won, I think there were lots of disgruntled Spanish designers who felt that I'd trod on their toes. But I mean, it was, they were very, like, the organizers were very gracious about it. And I actually went to it was run by a enthusiastic sort of team in, Granollers, I think it's called, and it's just outside Barcelona. And they had a tent. Essentially, they have a little. Every year they have a town fair, and within that there's a little marquee with board games in it. And through that, this contest had been organised. And the year after I won, I was able to go to the fair, and it was fantastic. They treated me like a sort of, like a little hero. It was like they were really pleased that this game had won their contest and by then had already been picked up for publication. So for them, it was a feather in their cap too. So everybody couldn't have been more gracious about my victory, including the other Spanish designers I met. So it was a real treat, but it was a great entry because that game had a little bit of cachet about it and people still talk about it. So that was a good beginning, really good beginning.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I got started.
Yeah.
I feel like Trevor should now tell us his story.
I was just going to say the same thing. Yeah. Trevor?
Oh, God. So, I mean, in some ways, I guess it's a similar thing, right? Starting with hacking other games when I was young. But I think in addition to hacking existing games, I, unlike Brett, got into some of these massively customizable games. The two obvious ones that 97% of designers mention is Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering. So I got pretty hard into both of those when I was younger. And of course, those are all about customizing your experience, right? Like the designers give you a toolkit and then you say, well, what do I want to do with that? And so that's, design within someone else's sandbox, but it's definitely design. And I guess the other thing about it is that that sort of got me into the idea of doing something with games when you're not at the table, right? Like it's something to think about and to do, right? When you're creating an adventure for Dungeons and Dragons or designing a deck for Magic the Gathering or any of those types of games, you're doing something when you're not playing, which was, I think that sort of caught the bug through doing that. And then I wasted loads of time. So basically when I was in university, with a variety of friends I'm Canadian, I'm not British, back in Canada. So, we would try to design games. We tried to, this was after we'd sort of learned about Euros and these sorts of things too. We're like, oh, we could design. Again, we didn't know what the process was. So we'd vomit something in the cardboard and which is like, oh, this isn't much fun, is it? Okay, I guess this isn't a game. Moving on, and then a month would pass and we'd try another one. And then there was no idea that, these things don't come fully formed. We just didn't get that. And so it wasn't until, how long was it? 2014, 13, 14. I moved to the UK, for sort of work and stumbled upon a play testing group which Brett had set up with a few like Matt Dunstan and a couple other of the sort of Cambridge design community, and I came into that, and then they had figured out that designing games required, and it's an iterative process. And so then I learned it was an iterative process thanks to them teaching me it was an iterative process. And so then that sort of started the moving towards it actually becoming something. And I should also mention there's been a big group of people to come into that sort of design community. So the other one, biggest one for me is David Thompson. So he's an American, and we've since gone on to design a bunch of games together, like Undaunted and War Chest and these things. So basically, that from there I met David, and I obviously met Brett, and through those two relationships and this broader community that sort of has been built around Cambridge, I've been able to, it's still sort of a part-time thing for me, but it's more now than just a hobby. Like I do it as a part-time job as well.
Yeah. What's your other part-time job?
So my main job is I work I guess it's sort of ed tech in that. So I work at a publishing company attached to the Cambridge University, so Cambridge University Press. But I work in sort of education, like in a sort of research and development technology stuff, using big bad nasty AI to basically enhance the way that people can, so it's ed tech. So that's what I do. But it's part time. Well, actually, I say that it's my main gig for sure. So basically, I work 4 days a week there, and then I do 1 day a week on game design plus evenings and weekends. Oh, I was squeezing in around the family as well. So, but like I definitely still view that as my job, and this is more sort of a hobby with benefits, for sure.
A hobby with benefits, nice. I'm very curious about how your design community works, because most of the people that I work with and the way that I work is 90 something percent online, and we use Tabletop Simulator. That's how I met Matt as well, who got us, who introduced us. And I'm curious. First of all, you guys, do you do all of your game design physically together? do you use Tabletop Simulator at all?
Well, we have done, but only when we had to, only when COVID made it a necessity.
Yeah.
But before then, and now that we can now play in person and design in person, it's all done in person. And I think for both of us, that's a more productive space.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, we worked with David during David Thompson. During COVID. We had one idea that the three of us worked on together, and that was all done remotely. I mean, Trevor and I might have been in the same room, but David was in a different country. So all of our playtesting on that was done within Tabletop Simulator. And that was productive, but I don't think it's the ideal mode for, at least for either of us.
Yeah. So like for me, when I work with David Thompson, he lives in America now and I live here. So there's no other option, right? So we do 100% of our stuff through Tabletop Simulator. And so we had started doing that even when he lived here, because we still did physical prototyping. But like there were evenings when, we couldn't, because we didn't live next to each other, right? Like whereas Brett and I live literally down the street, I drove over tonight because it's raining. It's raining, but it's like the 4-minute walk, right. So it's pretty shameful that I drove. But with David, anyway, Dave and I pretty much got into Tabletop Simulator quite early on, so like 2016 or something, and we've been doing, obviously now for the last 5-6 years, it's been exclusively on Tabletop Simulator. But yeah, I certainly much prefer. I mean, there are benefits, obviously, of working on Tabletop Simulator, and not just out of necessity. It's very easy to make changes and reset things and all these things. But the physical process of creating things and putting them on a table is I much prefer it. And especially, and of course, there are just some sorts of games that just don't work in Tabletop Simulator. If you have a physical component, like a dexterity component, that's an obvious one. But also, I just think a lot of more sort of large group social games just you don't get the dynamics. You don't see what it's like. And even with more sort of strategy games, like just going through that physical prototyping phase, it teaches you a lot about the sort of physicality of it and the process of playing, which I think is something that Brett and I are both really interested in, like trying to make the experience of playing from that physical side as smooth as possible.
Yes.
And not having too much faff, whereas I think lots of games now, certainly in the hobby space, are happy to have faff, but It makes both our skins crawl.
but
Do I have to touch this thing again?
But also,
like, why am I touching that thing and then having to touch that thing and then touch it again? Just no.
Boy. But I think tabletop simulator games in tabletop simulator are not the same as they are in the real world, even if it's a one-to-one translation. It's just not the same experience. The game is literally different for people. So if you only create and playtest in tabletop simulator, that doesn't tell you everything about how that game is going to work in the real world. I don't think it can do.
Yeah.
So if you never make that jump and see what it's like for real, and make all the components and handle all the cards and shuffle them and move everything around, and you haven't actually experienced the game as it will be played, because you're not creating a video game, you're not creating an app, and tabletop simulator is just a mode to another virtual world. It's supposed to be a space that does allow for the simulation of a real game, but it's not the same. At least I don't think so. And in fact, I have playtested other games in TTS. Pandemic made it necessitated learning it, steep learning curve. It's a great tool, but it's not the same. And I think it can trick people.
Yeah.
And I think games potentially suffer from that. Like when they're translated into the real world, suddenly they're these crazy, massive things with an enormous number of components that take 45 minutes to get onto the table. I mean, I would never play those kind of games anyway, and that's fine. They're not for me, and I get that. But I think, it could flatter to deceive a little bit too much. It makes the games different, they're just different experiences. So it's kind of, it has to come with a warning, I guess. Also, it takes twice as long to play games in TTS, even if you know what you're doing. You can't even judge that one aspect of the game, let alone any other kind of experiential aspect.
It's this weird thing where the setup is instantaneous. So you get false senses of the setup time and the breakdown time. So the two, but then also the actual in-game thing, because typically it's like Brett said, it's faster to play in the real world, but slower to set up and tear down. So you gives just a totally skewed sense of the actual end-to-end experience of playing the game. But there is, needs must, right? Again, it has its place, it has its benefits, and for some working relationships, there's no other alternative. David and I could not continue to make games if we didn't have tabletop simulator or something like it. And we've definitely been burned with assuming that, just not realizing the extent of, especially those things around setup and component count and those sorts of things. Well, how many of those bits do you need? And it's it's an endless bag. Put an infinite bag in the box. It's no, it doesn't does it?
But also we've been burnt experientially. We've taken a game out of the virtual space into meat space, and it's almost broken instantaneously. The experience is completely crumbled. We're what the hell is this? It doesn't work. It's no fun. What were we thinking? So we were deceived, essentially. Maybe that says more about us than it does about the game. But almost instantaneously, when we put the game in front of somebody else in the real world with componentry that we'd constructed, it broke. It just was oh God, this is awful. I mean, it maybe not awful, but to us, it seemed as if it was such a downgrade. We weren't even sure what happened. We couldn't quite process it. And it just goes to show, I suppose, that it's oh, this is now something else. It was something in the computer, and now it's something else in the real world, and we don't like what it is in the real world. So maybe we should just put that aside.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's horses for courses, of course. It's going to work for other people. But maybe we're just too much of a Luddite, and maybe I'm too much of a Luddite.
Well, I feel like you guys were very lucky and to have a physical design group of committed designers, and you've been spoiled by that.
That is a fair point. And absolutely, and that is one of the amazing things that Tabletop Simulator and Friends has done, is allowed people to make connections and connect up and No, absolutely. And like I mean, again, I'm much less. I poo-poo it probably less than Brett does because I use it 3 nights a week. But like, but yeah, I just think it does limit the sorts of games you can make. But and maybe that's fine. Like if you are making largely sort of yeah, I guess sort of more what to call them. I keep saying stretching it, but that's not the right thing. Where it's less about the interaction between the players, right? Because tabletop simulator doesn't do a good job of letting you look someone in the eyes, or like I mean, again, you can simulate, like you can play some of those sorts of games, but it's just you miss out on some of that. And it's similarly, I think it does reduce the sorts of information you can glean from playtesting. Right? Like you can't see if someone's checking their phone and checking out of the game. You can't see where people are. I mean, you can see the little hovering things, but you can't see what they're focusing on and these sorts of things, which is all really valuable feedback. Again, it's not. I'm not saying you can't get that. Like you can't. Obviously, people can play test in tabletop simulator, but it does limit it.
But you make a good point. We have been very spoiled.
Yes.
Because not only, I mean, there are lots of other playtest groups in the UK, and the playtest community and the design community in the UK is really strong. And that's been a huge part of all of our successes, because there's people to talk to about their connections with publishers and their experience. And to, at the same level, you can have a really interesting and meaningful discussion with other designers when you put stuff on the table in front of them. But even just in Cambridge, the group has been incredibly fertile and successful. We've always had, we used to meet every week before COVID, and we did so for years and years and years. And often we would have like 10 people come. I think one time we had 18 people come. It wasn't every week, but often there would be 6 or 7, enough for 2 or 3 groups even to be playing simultaneously. And that was every week. So you had it was a great, you had a kind of deadline for your homework. It's like, well, I better get my prototype done by Wednesday, because that's when, that's then I'm going to have another chance to play test it in person. I appreciate that most people don't have access to that kind of regularity, especially not in person. So we have been very lucky for sure. And that's something to hold on to. So fair enough for calling us out.
Yeah, and it is interesting because, like, I, as I mentioned earlier, like I had tried designing games with friends of mine from back home. So I mean, I've never published a game on my own. Like and I don't have any interest in doing it. But the fact is, like, I was working with, from the very beginning, I was, attempting co-designs with people. But even then, even when you have another person to bounce off with, if it's someone who doesn't have the experience and doesn't know the process and doesn't have the connections into publishers and sorts of things, then it's just that much harder, right? So I think, yeah. I'm well aware that I'm spoiled and lucky to have made these connections, and obviously it has contributed massively to where I am now.
Yeah, for sure. How has your taste changed as designers? Because I remember when we met at Essen, I think we briefly talked about how we're all starting to think more about smaller games and enjoy smaller games. At least for me, I can say I've recently been thinking about which games I want to sell from my collection, and it has been mostly those large epic games with tons of components that I realize I just haven't played in a couple of years. And whilst it's like those small games like The Crew or Targi or Cartographers or Bonanza that I find really easy to keep in my collection because I can almost always, or Mandala. Today, actually, I played Mandala for the first time with Matt on Tabletop Simulator.
Right.
And I really enjoy, first of all, great game. I really enjoy it. It's so clean. It feels like an evergreen game. And just yeah, I really love that type of game. But anyway, my question started with how has your taste changed as game designers and as gamers through the years?
I mean,
Cool.
well, I'm just like, I can't be bothered anymore. Any game that takes more than about 15 minutes is too much for me. Like I just don't have the patience for longer games. I've played them and and it's useful to play them, but nothing about, there's a broad kind of like huge kind of block of the hobby genre, which is all about bigger the better, more mechanisms, more action selection stuff, more like everything's just thrown at it. And they seem incomprehensible to me and also almost all incredibly identical. But they're all going to take hours to play and hours to learn how to play well. And of course, that's exactly why people like them. I totally get that. It's just I'm further and I find myself further and further away from being interested in them to the point of now I would never want to play them. I just would be miserable. I think I would sit there and I would learn the rules and I would move my little cubes up and down and I would just be miserable. And I've got cooler and cooler about those kind of games, but clearly they're a huge part of the hobby and that's fine. They just don't work for me. And I don't know whether I've brought Trevor down to my level, but I feel like he's moving that same direction too. So like a lot of the games we work on, we're always trying to pare them down to their absolute minimum. And that's to keep things simple, to keep things immediate, to keep things visible, like just to have really short, punchy experiences, which you can then play again and again and again. And hopefully they can deliver over and over. And I think Mandala is a really good example of a game that has that kind of classical evergreen feel. Every time you play it can be very different, but once you've got over the little bit of a hurdle you need to kind of process to understand the strategy, I think it can really pay off. But it's almost, it's just cards with 6 colors. They don't have any numbers on them. I know the river has a number in it, but it's a very simple structure with very simple components and a very easy kind of entry. And it takes 20 minutes. Or less potentially, can be really quick. And anything longer than that, I personally don't have the patience for. Trevor's on a slightly different part of the spectrum, for sure.
I have more tolerance than Brett does, for sure. But certainly I'm trending downwards, upwards. Depending on anyone. So, but I think it's interesting because, like, I mean, even because there's so many different dimensions to a game, right? And so, like, some of my favorite experiences playing games throughout my life have been playing. I played a ton of diplomacy when I was in high school, so my teenage years. And that is a long game. That's an epic game. But the rules are like dead simple, right? So I think, like, I've always, and I mean, I mentioned Dungeons and Dragons and I mentioned Magic the Gathering, but what I didn't mention is that at the same time I was playing tons of like Go and chess and poker and other traditional card games, trick taking games and these sorts of things. Like I've always loved games with really, really lean, minimal sort of rule sets. And that's something that hasn't ever gone away. I've never designed. Well, okay, I gotta be careful. I am a co-creator in Undaunted Stalingrad, which is a big beast of a box. So I gotta be careful what I say. But like, with the games I make with David, I'm definitely the one who's. I mean, he appreciates lean things too, but he certainly has a much higher, what we call a Chrome budget. Like he's willing to put more stuff, more fiddliness, more individual rules or whatever into something that I am. But I'm trying to pull it down to we just can't do this. We have to kill this. We have to kill this. But yeah, again, there's so I guess the point is that and I've been, like I have gone full into various games which are long and crunchy, and like I had my Euro phase where it's like give me more, give me more. But I think my sensibilities have always been on the leaner side. And then the other thing is just practicality, right? Like, I just, I have a family and, I I spend the overwhelming majority of my game time designing games. And so, like, I'm not going to I don't have the time to sit down and play a 4 or 5 hour game. It's just like, I haven't played a game that takes more than an hour in years, I'm gonna say.
Wow.
I don't think so.
Probably not.
I don't think so.
Wow.
Certainly never more than 90 minutes. I can't even think of the last game I played that took over an hour. I'm trying to think. I mean, that's obviously I've sat down and played. It's funny, of course. I have sat down and played the same game over many, 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 many times and played for more than an hour. But I can't think of the last time I played a long game. So yeah, so that's the thing. So definitely, it's been a trend towards the faster, the simpler. Like, I want the rules to just be like, I don't want the rules get in the way. I just like, I'm becoming spoiled, and I just want to get into it.
Yeah, I find the same thing with lots of gamers when they first get into the hobby. They want to get the Gloomhavens and the giant legacy game, with hundreds of hours of campaigns. But then you see them in in a little bit of time, and then with going lighter and lighter. I feel like at least I've felt that trend as well. But I think that partly it's, I mean, you can get like Trevor said, playing the same game over and over again. Like, those are like great dopamine hits, whilst, I mean, it's not that, like, I also, I definitely, there's big games that I love. I'm a big Scythe fan. I really like Great Wall as well, and I also work on bigger games. But I definitely find myself feeling like bigger games are a little bit more work, whilst smaller games are a little bit more fun.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it's the whole chess is work, checkers is play thing, which I like. I don't want to play a game that's smarter than I do. Smarter than I am, rather. I just want to get into it, and certainly when we're designing together, when we've got stuff on the table in between us, and we're in meat space, and we're playing with our components, we're constantly seeking ways to. Well, we're trying to understand what it is that we're trying to do, like find the idea in the heart of whatever it is we're messing about with. But when we've found it, it's like, well, how can we do that with the least possible fuss, with the fewest components and the fewest bits of data and the fewest colors and the fewest numbers and the fewest dimensions? Like, now we get a bit freaked. Like, Mandala is a good example because they're just colors. All the cards have exactly one dimension on them. They're just a color. So if we have an idea and it requires colors and numbers, we get a bit angsty. It's like, well, that's too confusing. We don't want components with 2 dimensions. That's too fussy. We can have colors or numbers. You can't have both. Calm down.
We have a lot of folders in our game design like area that's games where it's like, this seems like a good idea, but it would require like someone to actually go off and create data for the game to work, like some cards with varying numbers and costs, and we're like, well, neither one of us are going to do that.
No, we're not going to do that.
So it just sits there. It's probably a perfectly good idea, and it could turn into a game, but it's just like,
but it needs scoring objectives with different values and VPs on it. It's like, oh, fuck that! Like, that's way too much. It's just not what we're interested in. We'd rather get something on the table and like have something very pure, I suppose, and like seek that purity. I mean, maybe that means we are missing out on really good ideas or games that could sell really well and have a really big audience. But I think the journey that designers go on is they realize they should just do stuff for themselves. Like, more and more, it's like, I like it. How could I possibly design a game I don't like or I don't enjoy? How could I sell that? How could I do a good job? How could I support that or promote that to a publisher? I only want to spend time on games that I want to play. in terms of design. And I think it's the case that most designers sort of move in that direction. They find their voice and they realize the thing that really interests them, and that's what they pursue. And maybe some of them get there a lot quicker than I did, but I think that's what drives people, because I don't know how you could design for other people. I don't know what that would mean. How could I, I'm just speaking personally, how could I design a game and know that it was any good if I wasn't in the audience for that game, I suppose?
I mean, I will push back a little bit and say I think that is another case of it being a luxury, right?
Yeah.
Like there are plenty of people who, like, I'm just thinking, for example, in the mass market, right? Like, someone has to make games for 4-year-olds, or and you can't always be in the target audience of a game. I mean,
that's a little bit. Kids games are different because the best kids games can be played by grown-ups.
Yeah.
Like
That's true.
People play kids games and think they're trivial, or they're easy, or they're simplistic. But I think the actual design process of iterating towards something that can be appreciated and enjoyed by a 5 or 6-year-old, and I don't have a lot of experience of that. Like, I think that's pretty sophisticated, actually. Yeah. That's harder than it looks, and probably a lot harder than building some 90-minute, 2-hour Euro game out of lots of parts of other 90-minute, 2-hour Euro games in some sort of Frankensteinian nightmare. Like, that's easy because they're all. How could you know? You don't have to try very hard. So I'll just dump all that crap in there and it'll probably work. Like, something will happen, but you haven't got anywhere to hide in a game for a 5-year-old.
Yeah, well, it feels like I've one thing I've heard about like in movies, making movies for kids or TV shows for kids or books for kids, it's actually a lot more difficult because an adult would sit through a bad movie, whilst a kid, if it gets bored, is just going to get up and leave. So you need to keep their attention for the period of time that the game is. I guess the good thing is they also like randomness is something that Euro gamers they want to have control over the randomness, whilst kids won't. They won't push back.
They'll just receive the game as it is and experience it as directly as possible. But that is kind of how I want to play games. It doesn't mean I want to play games for 5-year-olds. Like, I want a little bit more agency or a little bit more meat on those bones, but not much more. So maybe I'm just tending towards that level. Something that, because if you can really, we always the one example we always use of a game that is the kind of thing that you could dream of making if you were really, really smart is Dobble, because that literally can be played by 5-year-olds and anybody else. And it takes 3 seconds to explain it. And it's genius, but it seems obvious, but it's not obvious. It was really sophisticated and subtle. It's very clever, but it's very simple. That's not easy to do at all. It's really, really hard. And because of that simplicity and cleverness, it sells a boatload it sells millions and millions of copies every month practically, and will do for the rest of the time, and totally deserves its success. And when you talk to people, ask people who are not in the hobby, or if you play Dobble, most often they've experienced it because it's everywhere. And that's really hard to achieve, that kind of level of universality, something that literally anyone, including a 5-year-old, can engage with and can experience and play with anyone else. So that is the dream, I suppose, of something so simple and so immediate and so obvious that it seems like it should have already been invented. But of course, somebody had to have the idea.
Yeah. It's just beautiful. I remember the first time I played Point Salad, for me was one of those experiences where I didn't need to hear the rules explanation. I saw the way that the game was set up, with the backs of the cards being points, and then the other fruit cards, and I immediately knew how to play, and I was like, "This is, this is so cool." Trevor, I'm not sure if I didn't step on your.
No.
That's
No.
all right.
No, I mean, that's a good example of something that's kind of a distillation of a more kind of like it uses some hobby game tropes, which is why it's familiar to gamers, but it is distilled down to its essence. And the whole, besides the card thing, that's the clever thing. Like every point scoring objective is different. And it's a really clever way of taking familiar things and making them much more approachable by almost anyone, as you say, and almost immediately. Like it's barely one side of A5, is it? Like the rules wise, there's hardly anything there, and yet, as you say, it's very immediate and obvious. But it was sort of taken. I think, like it looks like somebody looked at stuff that was already out there, like other hobbyist games, and they saw, well, how could we strip that back to the bare essentials? How could we distill that down to its absolute essence? And that's the clever thing about it.
Yeah. I want to ask you guys about development of games, because I mean, we all know most games are completely done the first time you try them, right? They work and they're fun. But in those rare cases where they aren't, how do you go about developing them? What are the sorts of questions that you ask, and what does that process look like for you? I'm gonna leave you to choose who answers, because I don't have like a visual on either of you. So
it is the case that both of us have. Well, in the case of Trevor, all of his games he's designed with other people. Almost all of my successful games I've designed with other people. And so I think having a co-designer changes the answer to that question, because if you're working on your own, development is you sitting in a room on your own, trying to be smart.
Yeah.
Maybe having some playtest feedback and sort of, musing about how you could react to that. But with another person and both of you having co-ownership of it, I think it's much easier. Like the process is more fluid. Like it can be more productive more quickly, because you just put it and go, well, okay, that didn't work. Well, what should we try now? And you're constantly challenging each other to do a little bit better. It's like, well, I'm going to tell you this idea. It's terrible, but let's see if it's going to spark something in either of our minds. Most of the time, that's how we work, I think. Like you just put stuff on the table and you see, and the other one goes, no, that's terrible. What about this? Oh, no, that's terrible. But what about this? And eventually you'll get to a step forward.
Yeah.
And you can then take that into the next iteration of the game and maybe play test with other people. But of course, the joy of having a co-author is you've got two people in the room to start with. A lot of our games are 2 players. We don't actually need other people. We can play test a lot on our own. Now, that's risky if you don't then eventually put it out to other people. But it means it can be a much more direct process, I suppose, and much speeded up, I think. But most of it is just fighting with each other about whether it's good enough, and holding each other to a higher standard. And go, well, that isn't good enough, is it? Like that's a hack. That's rubbish. That's a terrible idea. But what about the next one? And always trying to improve on what's already on the table.
One thing I mean, the only thing I'll add to that, I totally agree, is what I find interesting is that I've worked with a variety of other people, but I basically work with Brett and I work with David. And the role that development takes and the way that we work on games is quite different. I don't know if I've ever actually probably talked about this, Brett. So with Brett,
the floor is yours.
Well, with Brett and I, it's very much that. So like we will just throw bits of ideas at each other, because we basically, we have pretty much every Thursday we'll meet up and we have most of the day. And so, like sometimes I'll throw 1 or 2 ideas I've had, but just really loose ideas. Like I basically never now do sort of create a prototype myself, do a solo play. I don't do that anymore. Like I will just, wait and either throw it at Brett or throw it at David and see if there's something there. But certainly with Brett, I think we're much better at sort of that co-evolution of an idea into something. And often, because I think we both have a pretty good developer's head, I think, and seeing, and also just knowing that sometimes you'll go, oh, okay, there's clearly nothing here, or there is something here, obviously. There's always something there, but we're either we can't find it, or we can't find it now, or whatever. So we just kick it, put on the shelf. What David and I we discovered is that really the games we've had any success with have had quite a bit more meat on the bones, and sort of a more well formulated idea for what it is and what we want it to be. And it's usually one or the other of us will say, like, this is it, this is what I want it to be. And then obviously then we hack it around a bit and throw things out. But basically whenever we just try this little more loosey goosey approach that Brett and I does, it sort of just spins out of control, and and I think it's again, I guess the point is that there's different ways of tackling development, and I know that some people are even more to that extreme. So David has worked with a lot of people, and he's, I won't give the names, but like he's mentioned he's worked with some people who basically they're like, will come into a partnership with effectively what they consider to be a fully formed thing with lots of different bits. And again, they hack things away, but it's pretty much this high level sort of, like a very well formed system in place before they even start. And that's not really how Brett and I work. I mean, so there's, have there been a few examples where we haven't really had to do too much to the game, but often those are cases where it's basically an idea and that's the game. Like there's one bit to the game, but I just can't imagine what it'll be like trying to develop a game on my own. Like I can't even begin to.
Yeah, if I had one piece of advice for a game designer is find somebody else to game design with and become co-designers, to share ideas, to share the kind of struggle of it, and to share the enjoyment of the creative discovery of it as well, which is just really hard on your own. If you've only got your own, there's only one voice in the room. I think it's hard unless you're an auteur, unless you're kind of completely consumed by your own vision and passion. Most of the time it's not that. Most of the time it's kind of hard work, and it's about thrashing something out of nothing and just playing around, being experimental and trying things out, going, oh, that's terrible, let's try the next thing. Oh, that's terrible, let's try another thing. And I think that can be very productive, but it's going to be different for different people.
Yeah, we don't have our cameras on, so you can't see me nod the whole way through. That's been exactly my experience. I tried doing like solo design twice, once for a contest and once for a very small little solo game, which I thought, it's a solo game, it's going to be easy to do by myself, and it was not at all the case. Especially it being a puzzle game, but just in general, it's very fun. Like a big part of the design, I think it needs to be fun in order for you to make something that is fun, or at least.
Absolutely. Sometimes not all of our ideas are successful. Sometimes we'll spend a whole Thursday trying to thrash something out of an idea, and we'll get to, I'll go home, that was deflated. It's like, oh crikey, that was like 5 hours of nothing, of us failing at every turn to come up with something that worked. But then you have to bounce back from that. I mean, part of it is just getting back on the horse and going, next time will be better. But the other point about having a co-designer or somebody else just there with you in the sort of the mix of it is that's only the beginning of it. Even if you design a game together, then what? Then you've got to do all the work. You've got to go to publishers and go to conventions and do pitches and make videos and write rules and do all the admin of being professionals.
Yeah.
And that's really hard on your own. Like, you think designing is hard on your own. Doing all of that at a professional level on your own would be exhausting. So that's another reason to have a co-designer, is that you can help each other with that. You can keep each other on point. Because self-motivating yourself to do all of those things, having actually designed a successful game, would be just really hard work, just very hard to do successfully, unless, as I say, you're this sort of imbued by your own, completely overtaken by your own vision and passion that you don't need anybody else, and everybody else is in the way, and you can just get on with it. Good for those, but there's very few of those people out there. So yeah, if you're listening to this and you want to design games, find somebody else who probably wants to design, that you can design with, and see whether that works, because it could really propel you, I suppose.
Yeah. And the chances that you are going to have all of the skills necessary to make a good game are pretty slim. And so, the key thing is you need to find someone who you can get on with, right? And that you can, be open and honest with, and, you enjoy spending time with them. But, different people have different skills. My graphic design is absolute shit. And
you can't even draw a square.
All right. My squares are getting better, but
yeah, but they're not square, are they? They're one of the simplest shapes. The Greeks had the squares down.
Yeah. So,
and you have a computer.
I know.
Anyway.
So the point is that, there are, if you can find someone whose skills complement yours, that's great.
If both of you are fighting for the same kind of space to try and do the same little bits of the job, then that could be hard as well, I guess.
Yeah.
But most of it, mostly is about finding someone you can just be, uninhibited with, I guess, about ideas, and just put it on the table and go, what about this? And they'll go, no, that's terrible. And you're like, right, yeah, you're right. Let's get on to the next one, and not have any ego in it, I suppose.
Yeah.
Because it's not. No game, as you pointed out, as you said, no game arrives fully formed unless it's the simplest possible one. It's always just scraps of an idea.
Yeah.
It's the whole kill your darlings thing. You've got to put a bullet in the brain of most of them and go, that's terrible. Let's move on.
Yeah.
And it's helpful if somebody else is there with a gun, because you don't have to shoot your own babies. I mean, it really is. It's the voice of reason is always the other person, I suppose, and that is a really helpful reflection, I think.
Yeah, you can do it together as parents, right?
Quite. Well, you can share the guilt and the responsibility and the success, but it's not doing any of those. Surviving all of that on your own is really hard, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And then actually, there is the only game that I've heard a legend about is Codenames, that there wasn't any development after the.
Really? Is that right?
Yeah, Codenames.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard the same story.
Well,
that he basically he put it out there and then said, well, this can't be it. So he spent like 6 or 9 months quote unquote developing it, and every change he made was like, well, this doesn't make it any better. Again, I don't know if it's true, but I've heard the same story, and so that means it must be true.
Oh, definitely. Did you hear it on the internet?
Yeah, I heard the internet. I heard it on the internet.
Oh wow! Yeah. Oh yeah, the internet's good. Everything on the internet's true, of course. Yeah. But I mean, of course, he didn't. That wasn't his first idea.
No, quite.
Like that was the end of a long journey for him. So the idea that it arrived fully formed ex nihilo is ridiculous.
Yeah.
He was already an experienced designer. He could have been. His subconscious could have been working that for a long time. So that's the dream, of course. So you're going to wake up, bolt upright in bed in the middle of the night, and have your brilliant idea. And you might, but it's very unlikely to be your first idea that you've ever had.
Yeah.
Like it can't be that. That's really unlikely. Of course, but at least if with a bit of experience now, I don't know that. Well, I don't think it can be true that either of us have had our best idea. That would be terrible. We might as well just, climb into our graves right now. Like the best idea is always the one that you've not had yet. But at least I think now, if we came across it, whatever it might be, we'd recognize it or be more likely to recognize it and be more likely to capture it and do something with it, I guess. We've got those tools, like we've got the connections and we've understood the process and the business and how it works.
Yeah.
We've got people to show it to. We're not, you were saying earlier that potentially you wanted to become a publisher. We're not going to do that. So, but we know what to do with our idea, I think, when we have it. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. Well, it looks like you know what you're doing for sure.
How on earth can you tell?
It sounds like it. That's what I meant.
Well, I don't know. It's mostly about turning up, isn't it? It's just about doing it over and over and failing over and over. We've both come up with hundreds of ideas which we didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And
So I always like to draw the comparison to, I mentioned Go earlier, and I mean, if you play any of my games, you can see that I love Go. Is like, there's this old adage, which is, lose your first 50 games of Go so you can see the beauty of the game. But I mean, it just applies to everything. Just like, design your first 50 crap games so that you can make the one good game that you're going to make in your life, And, but I mean, obviously, hopefully you'll make more than one good game, but
you won't make very many great games.
Yeah.
I don't think. I think it's unlikely. Unless you are a true genius and like completely separate from all of the game designers. I mean, you can plug away, obviously Rainer Knizia's got 700, 800,000 published games under his belt, and he's a machine. But but that's because he's an entrepreneur. Like, he's made that happen. I mean,
but also not all of them are good games though as well, and most of them are very small games.
A lot of them very small. A lot of them, he's got things. He's got ideas that he returns to.
Yes.
This isn't to diss Ryan Knizia, by the way. Like, bravo, fair play to the guy. But if you can sell the same game 50 times over, good luck to you. But that takes nothing away from his success, which is he's just turned up for the last 30 years. He's just done it until he was good at it, and he made sure he was really disciplined about being good at it and being professional and being out there and looking after his own kind of brand and like creating games that he like understanding the market and doing all of this stuff. Like, that's way more work than I want to do. I'm hoping that one day I will wake up, bolt upright in the middle of the night and go, oh my God, that's it, isn't it? There it is. I can see the whole thing in my head and it's perfect. And that's the end of my journey. And I can sell that and it'll make double money. And then I won't have to worry about it for the rest of my life. Not there yet.
What are some of your favorite games?
So favorite games to play. I mean,
favorite games to play or games. Another thing I like to think is, what are games that you thought, I wish I did that game. I wish I designed that game.
Well, so we already mentioned Double. If I could take a game and just stick my name on it, I'd do that for sure. So a couple. I mentioned a couple that for me is, so The Mind. So it's pretty happy. So for me, it's probably the game that I'm the most in awe of as an experience, because it's literally the cards 1 to 100, and it can make you feel like you've run a marathon at the end, right? Where like you and your friends stand up and high five each other and you're panting. But like, I love it. Like, I absolutely love it, but it does not work with every group. That's the thing, right? Like, there are people like I've been through this. I have brought it out with people and it has fallen flat and failed miserably. So it doesn't have that experience, that quality of working with everyone. So it's beautiful and it's wonderful and I love it, but it's the sort of game that you need to have the right group of people to play with, I think. Another one that I really, really, really love and play probably more than anything else is Just One. Again, and that has it's simple and it's wonderful and you can teach it in 30 seconds and it works with pretty much anyone. Whereas that's a huge seller. But I also like, I do like sort of more strategy games as well. Like, I like I mentioned Go. I love Go. I happily play Go anytime. But the problem there is, again, like, it's really big time investments to see what is wonderful about it, which is not something that certainly not in the hobby space, where people are just like, oh, I played the game twice. Like, That's amazing. Twice. I played it twice. Like it's a game. Like then I like games that it's like that, or I guess or poker, or whatever. Like these sorts of games that like just they demand your time investment for you to get the benefit, like, to really get out of it what it is that's so amazing. But yeah, just don't have the time to play those sorts of games. So basically, for those sorts of games, like it's like whenever I see my brother, will play Go because we played it when we were kids, and but like I can't be bothered to like pull it out and teach it to someone. I mean, I've tried. I've made Brett play it a couple times, but
But that was baby Go. That wasn't even.
That was
Go.
baby Go.
Yeah.
I know. Anyway, that's it for me. What about you?
Oh well, I mean, I always the game the hobby games I played the most, and the one I can absolutely claim to always enjoy was Carcassonne. And it wasn't quite the first hobby game that I was introduced to, but it was one that I came to quite early in my kind of understanding of what the hobby game industry actually was and what those kind of games were. And I played it, I don't know, 100, 150, 200 times with a friend of mine, just two players. And just that repeat experience of it with the same person. And we added I had some of the expansions, and we liked some of the rules and we didn't like some of the rest of the rules. So it became this unique thing because we took some of the tiles out and we took some of the rules out. So when we played, it's different. Like we crafted our own version of it, but I mean, it's not so radically different from the core experience, but it becomes its own thing, I suppose. And even the size of the table that we used to play on meant that the edge of the table became part of the game. And everything, two players at Carcassonne, like everything is fought over, at least when we played. You didn't let the opponent have one road or like anything was fought over. And the more you could do to block them and get in their way and fight them, the better it was. So it became this huge battlefield, I suppose. But it has the wonderful aspect of this kind of emergent geography with the tiles. It's really beautiful. So I do like games with geographies, I suppose. Like that was always something I enjoyed about Carcassonne, even regardless of the game, right? It's like a little toy, like a little jigsaw you're putting together, and you build this landscape, and it has all these different features, and every time you play, it's completely different. And that was always very charming, I think. I'm just looking at my shelf of games. There's another game that I played a lot. I mean, I used to play a lot. Is Transamerica, which is a classic, but it's incredibly lean and simple and approachable. And I used to play it with my mother and my aunt, and we would play it whenever we used to go to see my aunt. And she was sort of in her 90s, and she enjoyed it. And she just there was a great joy in placing the little black sticks on the triangles and making your routes and getting to Charleston or wherever it was, or making a connection to New York. It was nothing in the way, I suppose. There was nothing between you and your objective and your experience. And it was just so smooth. And you played it over and over. Like in that game, you have to play it over and over. That's the whole point. You play multiple rounds. So you see it play out, like that geography, that emergent geography play out multiple times in a full game. Rather than having to sit there for 90 minutes to see the result of your choices, it was always played out really quickly. I mean, I haven't played either of them for a long time, but they are exemplars, I think, of games which can always be enjoyed every time I played them. But maybe it's all to do with your own personal relationship with those specific games and the people you played with them and who you were at that time and all of that. It isn't about the game, is it? It should be about the people. Yeah. The games are merely a facilitator. They're a reason to sit around a space at the same time and interact.
Yeah. Well, definitely. I mean, I just want to mention one more thing, because this is something I think I've realized quite recently. I mean, it's partly what Brett was just saying about it. So much of what it is that you love about a game is the experience, and so much of it, especially with older games, it's about nostalgia. But like, I'm totally willing to play games which are broken Like, and some of my favorite games are arguably broken by sort of modern design standards. So I'll mention just two. Like, there's this Knizia game called Loot, and like, if you actually sort of think too hard about it, like it's broken.
Sorry, Knizia.
Sorry, Knizia.
You're listening.
It's still one of my favorite games, but like basically it's a sort of an auction-y type game / area control-y type game, but like, you know, players have to put the stuff out to fight for, and you're drawing from a single deck. And if you only draw the things which are the things that are fought for, and you never draw any of the cards that let you fight for things. So like, the theme is, you're pirates and you're fighting, take turn to like steal merchant ships, gold from merchant ships. If you only draw the merchant ships, which are the things you fight for, and you never draw the pirate ships, like you literally can't win. And and so it's totally broken. And sometimes it's just super frustrating sometimes, but I absolutely love it. And another one I'll mention is this old Richard Garfield game called The Great Dalmoody. And it's broken. It's absolutely just fundamentally unfair and broken, but I love it because at least in The Great Dalmoody, that's sort of the point of the game. Like it's trying to make a point, and so that's a different thing. It's an experience. The experience is to teach you and make you role play and feel the horrors of a hierarchical society and whatever. But like it's broken, and there are people who just totally bounce off it. My wife and daughter included. Me and my son absolutely love it, and we're like, I'll play it any day. I just love it. But it's totally broken from a perspective of fairness or these things that that modern games want. They want fairness. And I get it. But like my point is there's a place for experiences in games which deliver experiences which aren't
this Euro.
Yeah, exactly. Less Euro, a bit weirder and wonkier, and tipsy turvy, and just own that, and so that's I just wanted to say that.
And the people you play with, because I've had a horrible experience sometimes with some of my favorite games. Like one of my favorite games is Dune, which can also the original Dune, and which can also be perceived as unfair, and you can have a game where easily in the first round that you're not winning. And it's got all of these problems, and you've got cards that are worthless, that I just spent all this spice on a card that's completely worthless. Why did they put worthless cards in anyway? And I played that game, and it's one of my favorite games, and I played it with some like heavy Euro gamers once, and the whole time they wouldn't stop whining, and it was one of the worst experiences ever.
Oh, I totally hear you. Oh yeah, so a similar one is like diplomacy. I mentioned that before, but I have played, and this is a 5-6 hour game. I played that game where after the first round, it's like, well, I can't possibly get anywhere close to even beginning to think about maybe possibly winning because someone screwed me on the first turn, and that's it. Like it's done. But I will still enjoy the next 6 hours of playing with friends
or with your friends. Exactly. We're playing with your friends.
Exactly. I try playing the mind with some gamers. Yeah, let's just like, this isn't a game. An activity. How could you possibly have, and then how could you possibly have anyone had been able to play 50-51 in the correct? It's a coin flip. And I'm like, yeah, but it's an amazing coin flip.
But it's also not a coin flip.
It's not a coin flip.
So
but and even if it was a coin flip, it's an amazing coin flip. Yes. Different strokes for different folks.
Yeah. All right.
Indeed.
Last question for both of you, and it's kind of what we've been talking about the whole time. But what does it take to become a game designer, and what would be your advice to somebody who wants to become a game designer?
Well, I think we have spoken of this, isn't it? I mean, certainly my advice would be to find someone else, I think, is to find a colleague that you can share all of that with. But mostly it is about turning up and just getting on with it and just not being too precious, I suppose, about your ideas, not imagining your first idea is your best idea, or even your second, third, fourth, 10th, 20th, 50th idea is somehow going to change the world. And you turn up at a convention and go, well, this is going to replace chess or whatever it might be. And start small. Yeah, find somebody, know that you're going to be shit, and then start with really small ideas first. Because some people, they turn up and they've created some vast game with 400 cards, and they've not playtested any part of it. And it's really hard to move on from that. It's really hard to make it's really hard to iterate from something which is, you have so much of an investment in. So you're kind of hamstringing your own, you're really making it hard for yourself to take steps forward if you put up those kind of obstacles. But it is mostly about doing it over and over, I think.
Yeah,
for sure. Just surround yourself with good people if you can, and if you can't in the meat space, then by all means, there are lots of people out there who I think it's much, in many ways now it's much well, it is obviously, and it's much easier to make contact with people now, and find people online if you need to, and just start doing it. Like, don't listen to us, just do it.
Yeah, do your own thing. There's no magic to it. It's just following your kind of dream in a way. Like if you've got an idea and it's like, well, that could be a game. Well, yeah, you're right. It could be. Go on with it. What are you sitting here for? There's nothing in your way. Like there's fewer obstacles now than there ever have been, I suppose. Certainly more game designers than there ever have been. Nothing is stopping you. Publishers, there's more publishers than ever. They all want ideas. You can you can be your own publisher. You can run a Kickstarter. You can self-publish. You can put it on the internet and give it away for free. There's so many ways to kind of get it out there. Once you've had your idea, that's not an obstacle. And in terms of making stuff, it's so much easier. If you want to make a really fancy prototype, use some digital printing thing, get it printed in China for $3 a deck or something. Just there's nothing stopping you. And it's not fundamentally hard. It's difficult to be good, but the actual process to make something, get it on the table and play it, provided you're aware or you're prepared for people not to like it. That's the hardest thing. And that actually still is kind of hard when you make something and you put it in front of other people for the first time and they don't kind of love it. Like that's like a dagger in the heart, but you've got to kind of go through that to make progress.
Yeah. And it's just one of these weird, hard things because you don't want to crush anyone too early. We've done that. I think. But like you need to know when you're going. Well, you don't. This is my point.
Oh,
you should when you go into this. Like it is. I think it is important to ask yourself, what are you going into this to do, right? And not, like if you're going into it to make the next Gloomhaven and become rich, or the next, like, it's a hard ask. But it's totally fine to make a game that you enjoy and that your friends and your family enjoy. And I think that's a totally realistic and noble thing to do, and do that, right? But I think, and I mean, again, maybe I shouldn't even be saying these things because I don't know. Like the chances of making it big and making it rich are really small. But if you don't have the confidence and the foolishness to have a go at it, then you're probably not going to be one of the people who could potentially be successful. So just don't listen to me. That's basically what I'm saying. Just go out, give it a go.
Yeah.
And but I think for you, most certainly, for you to succeed, you will need to, at some point along the way, learn some hubris and learn that, every idea that comes out of you isn't great, and that the version of the game that you have in front of you isn't the best version of that game, and these sorts of things. But yeah, so do be open, because but also at the same time, don't be so wishy-washy that you aren't willing to have some confidence and some idea and vision and for what it is that you want it to be, because otherwise you'll just chase around what other people say. And, you see plenty of people that do that. And it's like, well, okay, now you've made a game that has 10% of what that person thought was a good idea, and good game, and 10% of what that person thought was a good game. And sort of then it sort of loses its heart or whatever. But anyway, just go do it. That's what I'd say.
Yeah.
Easy.
Find someone and smash through it.
I mean, the advice I used to give people was don't spend any money, because you don't need to. Like, you can make, just with spit and twigs, you can make a prototype. It doesn't have to be flash. It can just be scribbles on bits of paper. And not only is that enough to play test with, that can be enough to pitch to publishers with, because publishers are smart. Like, they're not if you're thinking that far ahead, you shouldn't be spending money on artwork and production and boards and digitally printed boxes and all. I mean, you might enjoy, if you've got the money to spend, knock yourself out, make a lovely thing for yourself. But if you don't need any of that. That's not a requirement. And to even get to a point where you're in a room with a publisher with stuff on the table, they genuinely aren't going to care about the quality of your prototype or your graphic design work or your whatever it might be. They're interested in the idea, and they're interested in you as well as a potential sort of business partner, I guess. And anyone can be in that room. Like, it's not hard. It's a meritocracy. They want good games. Those publishers want to meet people who are interested in games and new ideas and like creative success. And the practical aspect of it isn't as important as the kind of creative inspiration, I guess. Like, the ideas are important. But that's the end of the process. The beginning of the process is just getting on the table and seeing whether it's any good. And listening to feedback, but not doing everything people give you, not just responding to feedback and doing what people tell you. You've got to, as Trevor was saying, you've got to have an opinion, but you should stick to whatever it is that got you there, whatever idea, is important to stick with the thing that you're most excited about and not be distracted. But it's very hard to do that. Unfortunately, it's hard not to get distracted. I mean, it's easy to put it on the table, but just get on with it. What are we talking about? Don't listen to us. Why? We're just babbling on now. This is nonsense. Make a thing, put it on the table, end of.
Perfect. Yeah, I agree. And if it's bad, good. Keep making other things.
Yeah, exactly. It's probably bad, by the way, but then you can get to the next thing and hopefully it'll be better.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is the end of the Anti-Knizia episode of...
Whoa!
Oh, that's not real.
Reiner Knizia is my favorite game designer. I absolutely love Reiner Knizia. Like, he's had some stinkers, but
sure.
He has by far the highest number and proportion of really good games that I have experienced. Like, to his ability to bang out a great game in seemingly a weekend.
Hats off to him.
Hats off to him. And so
I'm sure your listeners will agree we're not anti-Knizia.
Oh, no.
Just, I mean, he's also quite litigious, so I don't want to get on the wrong side.
Yeah, exactly. He'll somehow treat that as libel, and we'll be. Yeah. Anyway, no, yes, it's whenever once or twice someone says has used the word Knizian when describing a game I've made, and to me that's the biggest compliment. So. Yeah, even though sometimes that's a Knizia game without a hook, I'll take that as a win.
Yeah, absolutely. Fist bump in that case. Anyway,
moving on.
Sorry.
All right. Well, no, that's it. Thank you guys so much for being on the podcast. And I know it's getting pretty late for you. It's even later for me. It was amazing talking to you guys. I'm so happy that we got to chat a little bit more and in a little bit of a quieter place than Essen.
Yes,
And
quite.
I hope we get to do it again. And maybe next time I visit Matt, we can come down and play something physically.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.